I'm Deacon Joe, and I'm here for the Saint of the Week. The Saint of the Week is the North American Martyrs, a set of 8 Jesuits, 6 priests and 2 laymen, who were martyred in the years 1642 to 1649 in what today is Ontario and northern New York State. Now, their feast day isn't until October 19th, so you might ask, why are we doing this during Lent? We're doing it because what are the 3 principles of Lent? Prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. And these North American martyrs demonstrate all 3 of those beautifully with their lives, with their courage, and with the story that comes to fill our hearts with hope. Now, the Archbishop has recently, in the Denver Catholic, talked about a new apostolic age and a new need to get out to evangelize the culture, that we're not living in a time where the faith is either wanted in the market square or even want to be heard. And so where do we use an example of how to go out and evangelize? Well, the church has thousands of great examples, and they're called saints. Now, some of those saints witness with their blood, and that's where the North American martyrs come in. These were men who came out as early as 1625 and were martyred by the native peoples of New York and Canada. They were martyred because they brought the faith, and they were then used as a pawn in somebody else's war, either because of the English or because of traders or because of fear of diseases and things like that. The first one of them to be martyred, Saint René Goupil, was martyred in 1642. He was captured with Saint Isaac Jogues, and when Saint René, after being beaten, went to baptize a child, he was then executed on the spot. Now, St. Isaac Jogues didn't get the better of it. He spent 13 months in captivity as a slave laborer and facing torture until he was finally able to escape, get back to New France, and then, with the help of some friends, was able to get Pope Urban VIII to help him. His fingers had been gnawed off, especially these that were used to consecrate the Blessed Eucharist. They were gnawed off. That's how the native peoples treated their enemies, treated them all like that. But they knew that this man Jogues, had a special power in there. So Jogues had to get special dispensation in order to celebrate Mass. He returned to New France, and then in 1646, he and a companion, Saint Jean de Lalande, were on an expedition. They were captured by the Iroquois. They were terribly treated, so much so that, and I won't go into all of the details, but to the Indians, the way you died was this statement about how you had lived, and what you lived for was valuable. With Jogues, they were so impressed by his heroism, they were so impressed by his encouragement to other people, even when they poured tree resin over him and set that on fire, he kept encouraging others, he kept trying to lead them in hymns. That a brave jumped into the flames where he was being killed, cut his chest open, and took a big bite out of his heart. Now, the man with him, de Lalande, was young and had just come out to the missions a couple of months earlier. He faced a similar sort of torture. Now, those were in 1646. In 1649, there were 5 of the Jesuits who were martyred. Now, remember, the missions were far apart. From about where the headquarters was in New France to the missions was about 1,000 miles that was traveled by canoe and then portaging overland. The 2 mission stations they had, one in New York, one in Ontario, were about 430 miles apart. So they were isolated, they were alone, they had very little news, but they had heard by this point about Goupil, Jogues, and de Lalande. Now, Saint Antoine Daniel was working with the Indians, and he was at his mission church, and in July of 1648, the Iroquois attacked, and the Huron fled. So what did Antoine Daniel do? He blocked the way for the Iroquois and used his body as essentially as a safety zone so that the Hurons could escape, and then he was martyred in the process. But his sweetness of temperament really endeared him to the native people. About a year later, Saint Jean de Brébeuf and Saint Gabriel Lallemand were on a peace mission. They were trying to arrange a peace treaty between the French, the Hurons, and the Iroquois when they were captured by the Iroquois. And this was the great prize that the Iroquois had wanted. Saint Jean de Brébeuf was a very tall man, and the Indian name for him was like towering tree almost, Echoc. When he was captured, they spent a special time on him, and the martyrdom that he suffered is quite grisly, quite brutal, but that's how the Indians treated all of their esteemed opponents. They were so impressed by Brébeuf's courage, and then Lalemant the next day, that they paid them the great honor that I had said they gave to Jogues, and that was, I want some of his courage, and so I'll take a bite out of his heart. Now, the last two to be martyred, Garnier and then Chabanel, were both martyred in December of 1649, later that year. In Garnier's case, he was martyred during an Iroquois attack after he had baptized a child. Chabanel, on the other hand, was probably an example probably closer to my own heart, and that is, he spent 13 years in the missions, and he hated it. He didn't like the culture, he hated the food. He was a professor by disposition and by training, yet he made a vow that to serve the Lord, he would stay on the mission, and he would not shirk his responsibility or martyrdom that he expected. The result was that a Huron who had been baptized turned on him and killed him. Now, when you look at this, when you look at the martyrs, what were the results? The results were the missions were wiped out. The other result was that the Indian converts either fled, were executed martyred by the Iroquois, or they fled for safety to a Christian village near Montreal. The question, though, is what good did these saints do? Well, as I said before, the native peoples were convinced that the way you died really said how you lived. And that example of those French Jesuits steeled the resolve of the Hurons, and they made the gospel their own. It wasn't a question of the Europeans leading the Indians. Now it was the Indians leading the Indians. And they did so with such joy and gusto. One of the things that the native peoples would do is, if you were adopted in the tribe, you were expected to take on the duties of the tribe. Well, the Christians who were adopted in those tribes took on the customs of the tribe and practiced their Catholic faith, despite great odds. Now, about 7 or so years after Brébeuf's martyrdom, a young girl was born who would then go on to be known as Saint Kateri Tekakwitha. And it was her example, it was the example of the Jesuit martyrs that inspired her parents, that inspired her, and led her to become the Lily of the Mohawks. The other thing was that the people that were adopted evangelized via the clan system. As Chris Stefanik, in a short video, just under 6-minute video on the North American Martyrs, points out, the Jesuits showed that the price of souls is high, and that in order to reach those souls, it will take courage, it will take commitment, and it will take our trusting fully in the Lord. All of the principles that the Archbishop is saying that we need. And that saint could be you.